Terence's plays are more interesting, more poetic, and have a double plot. So Shakespeare, when he takes, comedy of errors, is going to like use some of Terence's double plot on a Plautus play, the Twin Monopoli. So, and we'll talk about that when we get to this. So Seneca, we remember Seneca because
Medea.
what? Medea, right. Medea, he wrote Oedipus, he wrote A Trojan Women. Again, he took Greek plays, mainly Euripides, a couple of Sophocles he did in Oedipus, mainly Euripides plays, and again, he translated, adapted them into Latin. So he, again, built on the Greek plays for a Roman audience. Were they performed publicly in the theaters? No, you are correct. They were not. They were read in the court. And people think that maybe he was trying to, because Nero's court was very corrupt. Nero just get mad and kick his wife down the stairs and, kill her and things like that. And people were poisoning each other and whatever. And people were kind of like, taken away, run away with their passions. And Seneca was a Stoic, right? Believed in evenness, whatever. So a lot of scholars think he was trying to write these plays, say, see what happens when Medea gets, all wrapped up in her passions. See the consequences of you being running away with your passions and anger and jealousy and all that. And then other scholars think, no, he was just pandering to the taste of the court. So, it depends. Seneca is going to have a huge influence on the Elizabethan writers, which we're about to get to. T.S. Eliot, the great English poet, is going to say, no Elizabethan hero dies without the stench of Seneca. He was not a fan of Seneca. He found Seneca kind of overblown and operatic, and the violence on stage, right? Because in the Greek theater, violence is what? Obscena, right. Obscene, off the stage. When Seneca wrote the plays, Medea kills her children. Has a dead body and throws your second son off the roof in front of her husband. So violence is on the stage. Violence is entertainment in Roman society. So the decadence and the corruption, you've seen the films and whatever, the fall of the Roman Empire, and, people always say, oh, America's Rome. I actually think America's more Athens, because Rome never really had the pretense to the kind of morality. Rome wasn't spreading democracy around the world. Rome was definitely imperialist and was an empire. Yeah.
So reading before at the beginning of this with Aristotle, is that Rome?
No, Aristotle is Greece. It's still Greece.
Okay.
Though it is Greece after the fall of Athens. So, it isn't the golden age of Greece. He's living after all these playwrights. He's going into the next century. So he's writing about the past and he's basically saying theater around us is crap. Yeah. So let me figure out why these plays were so good and let me analyze them. He's basically a teacher. So now, in terms of these timelines, what I say always is that there's a lot of facts and there's a lot of information and dates. But to really look at what all these things, how they tie together thematically. So here you have things like, what's going to happen is that there's a rise of this thing called Christianity, right? It starts to take over the whole kind of Roman world. It makes real inroads in Greece with the Greeks, partly because it's a resurrecting God, which is very much like Dionysus. He's also a resurrecting God. The kind of communion rite is very much like the Dionysian rite, because remember sparagmos, where the body is torn apart and then literally remembered. Also in Egypt with the Abydos Passion play. Isis, unfortunate goddess name right now, goes all through Europe, putting together the pieces of her brother Osiris, her husband brother Osiris, that's been killed by their evil brother Seth. So it's a resurrecting God. So this notion of Jesus really starts to take hold. And it really starts to take hold, and this is what Nietzsche later is going to say, that Christianity is a slave religion, because it really takes hold among the huge, huge slave population that exists. Because Rome went all over, and wherever it went, it basically made the people slaves. So all over Europe, this sort of gives a hope to the slave population, and as Rome starts to crumble and fall, and the barbarian, remember, is from the Greek word barbar, which was, what was barbar?
They like called any language that wasn't.
Any language that wasn't Greek. If you were not speaking Greek, sort of like the Parisians, you know, you ever been to Paris and tried to speak French, it's a disaster. You
Wait,
know,
so did the Greeks say it's all barbar to me?
it's all barbar. It's all barbar to me, yes. Rather than Shakespeare saying, I don't know what he said it was Greek to me, they would have said, I don't know what he said it was barbar to me. Absolutely right. So barbar. So there were all these, mainly from the east, from Asia, all these sort of waves. Also what was happening in terms of like the tribes that were in Germany and what was later going to be France and that part of Europe was sort of like couldn't control anymore what was happening in Britain. The Britons were getting out of hand. So Rome starts to lose its control and things start to fall apart. And then what starts to be, we're going to start moving into what is called the Dark Ages. Now this is only the Dark Ages in Europe, because meanwhile in the East in Constantinople it's kind of a golden age until the Crusades start to happen. And then kind of Crusaders kind of bring some of their Dark Ages to the East in a weird sort of way. So Europe just goes through, there's the Visigoths, there's the German tribes, they're attacking, everything's falling apart. So as the Roman Empire falls, slowly Christianity is rising through this, giving first hope, and then it's going to give a sense of order. So a sense of order is very, very important in terms of what we're going to look at in this next era, going into medieval and the Middle Ages. So there's Vikings are coming in, Magyars, Muslims are coming in. There's like everything is sort of tearing apart the empire, which is pretty rotten to the core. So it's also very vulnerable to fall. So what happens here is that we start to see people like St. Augustine, people like Tertullian, the Spectaculus, Emperor Constantine, who's going to give his name to Constantinople, becomes Christian in 313. So one of the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire, which is holding together somewhat, has become Christian. For a while, the theater sort of flourishes because his wife Theodora is an actress. So there's a kind of, she's been in the mimes that we were talking about that used female actresses a lot. So for a while, you know, the theater is allowed in the East. However, in the Western Roman Empire, all these are what's left of it. St. Augustine, who's a very, very key sort of early Christian philosopher, writer, starts writing. People start writing attacking the theater, basically saying the theater is immoral, the theater should be banned. There are various reasons for this. What are the various reasons? You're a Christian and you're trying to bring order to chaos and people are looking at the theater. Why don't you want it?
For religious reasons.
Religious
Yeah,
reasons,
kind of
yes. Which
those,
are?
Probably,
Like the palaces and
Obscenity, right? It's not that, because sex was not considered obscene, right? So it was lewd and the sexual, and Christianity was not, you know, it was about chastity, you know, purity, and sex was sort of like, you know, you don't, that sex becomes obscene. Do you have another thought? So that's one thing.
the Puritans and how they burned down the theaters again.
Yes, we're going to see it. That's going to be, that's going to recycle. It's going to be a really interesting thing because Christianity is going to get rid of the theater, and then it's going to bring the theater back, and then it's going to get rid of it again, depending. Also in this country, theater is going to be banned in New England. Theater is going to first get its hold in Virginia and Maryland. It's going to be banned because it's a very puritanical. The Puritans in New England really sort of set what their moral parameters are, what their definition of morality is. So sexuality, yes, that's one thing. You don't want all these sexual things, especially the mimes were sort of bawdy, done at weddings and whatever. Another, yes.
Was the violence on stage another reason?
There were, well, yeah, though the theater at this point was more comedy that had lasted, so the violence, the Roman violence of the, arena of the Colosseum,
Did that
certainly.
turn on into the Middle Ages, or the violence?
Well, it's interesting because no, it didn't. Though when we get to some of the mystery plays and the cycle plays that are being done, there was a feeling that sometimes when the scene with Judas was enacted, that they actually did hang someone who was meant to be hung. There's a little debate about how violent those plays were, whether the harrowing of hell actually executed criminals in that. It's a big debate. Generally, there wasn't violence, and there wasn't sex. What?
A snuff play.
A snuff play. Yeah, like you have Judas, and you actually hang him. The person who, is standing in for Jesus, for Judas, he actually hangs him. And in the Passion plays, actors would sometimes get crazy and would have themselves nailed to the cross because it was part of their, type of method acting, yeah. And they're still in this country. They're Passion plays where I don't think they use nails, but they have actors who kind of get tied to the cross.
Brooke
Yeah.
had a question watching before you said it too.
Wouldn't there also be like conflict with the different gods that are mentioned in a lot of
Ding,
these
ding, ding.
plays?
Absolutely. What are most of the characters in these plays? There's pagan deities, right? You're not going to have a play with Venus in it or with Zeus in it, right? So, and a lot of them, the gods show up, or they're about the gods. So yes, the gods. And there's another really interesting thing. When you think of what the theater was meant to be, because the theater came out of, like what you said, it came out of a religious right? But a different religion. So if you're sitting in the dark or semi-dark and you're listening, to someone talk about things that are affecting your spirit and your soul and your mind, where is that supposed to happen? According to in church. It is not supposed to happen in another gathering place where people are watching and listening. Theater, on one hand, is bawdy and trivial and, and gets people, and a distraction that gets people off of the holy path. But on the other hand, at its deepest sense, it is competition. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to break the fact that, it's all in the church, but at least in Catholicism, the Holy Week, again, it makes sense if they brought the theater back, because
That's right.
during Holy Week in Spain right now, there
Yep.
are people that actually have to carry the cross.
That's right.
Like they know the weight of Jesus' cross somehow.
That's right.
And they make more than 3 people carry the cross the same distance that Jesus had to carry it.
Are they still whipped because of the Middle Ages?
I don't think they're
the
whipped.
flagellants used to.
They're not whipped, but they carry. And then there's another one. There's another rite, which is they have to walk like if they were crucified. So they have to walk like this. Those are 2 different.
Yep.
So there's still theater within that because it's people playing the role.
Yeah.
Which is very present.
Yeah,
So
and this is what's about to happen when we see theater return.
Yeah,
The very church that banned it is going to be the entity that brings it back. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a little confused
Yes.
because did the rise of Christianity come from the Roman Empire?
It started while the Roman Empire was still around, yeah.
Where the,
Yeah, that's why Christians were, the famous Christians being tossed to the lions in the Colosseum. Yeah.
So if Constantine was the Roman Empire and like that
was
started
300 years later.
300 years later.
Yeah,
Okay.
because this is where we have, after the Christian, before the Christian era and after the Christian era.
So why was there that kind of fight between the religion if the Roman Empire brought it everywhere, brought Christianity?
No, the
over
Roman
there?
Empire didn't bring Christianity for the first 300 years.
Oh, okay.
Constantine, that's a really, really good question. Constantine doesn't come till here, see?
Okay.
This is when he comes in. And that's only in the East,
So so is
The
that
Roman Empire is busy collapsing.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the last recorded, this is when we think the last formal theatrical presentation in Rome was. So that's really, it took a while, it eroded and collapsed for a couple of hundred years, in sections. They lost their territory and eventually Rome itself fell. First few territories. Yeah.
Well, as far as Christianity destroying the theater and stuff, like they've always been all about like containing all the art. I mean, back in like with like Michelangelo and all those statues and stuff, they would hire all of the artists to like build statues for them.
Well, this was the nobility at this point. Michelangelo at this point became more secular.
Right.
Yeah. It was the church originally, but then it starts becoming more secular.
But,
We're going to talk about
they
this.
they've always like kind of wanted to have all the art so that it's like you can't get it elsewhere. So it's kind of like I don't say like brainwashing because I don't want to offend anyone, but kind of
But
brainwashing.
even the nobility brought that aspect into everything they commissioned for.
Yeah.
Artists like LeBron.
I mean, it was religious themes originally. Then it started to be, what happens when the Renaissance comes in. Renaissance basically means rebirth. And it's a rebirth of an interest in classical culture. That's really what it is. And it happens when Constantinople is, and this is where language becomes important. You can say that Constantinople fell to the Turks, or you can say the Turks regained Istanbul, right? It depends on your perspective. But what happened because at that point, Constantinople was not in the Dark Ages, it was Golden Ages. Aristotle gets rediscovered because all that stuff has been kept alive in the eastern part of the empire, which has survived. And it's like it's much more eclectic. So what happens is in 1453, which we'll get to in a second, waves of people, a lot of the Christians, a lot of the Europeans who had been living in Constantinople flee, and they come to Italy, they come to Rome, and everything is revitalized because they bring all this, literature and all this old knowledge and Aristotle. Latin things had survived because the church had been, the mass was originally in Latin, and because even peasants would learn Latin as well as their regular, local language, whatever they were speaking, Germanic or what was going to become French, or Britain or whatever it was. But Latin, as the church became a real stabilizing force. Because here you have in the Middle Ages, there's plague. There's roaming people, who are like can come and kill you because the lord of it's feudalism, right? So the lord, you're a vassal to a lord. If any of you have ever been to Italy, there's these little like walls all over Italy, especially in Tuscany and Umbria. There are these beautiful like little towns, but they're all behind walls on tops of hills, right? So that's where the sort of tradesmen and the lords of the manor were, and then all the peasants would be in the countryside around them. But if somebody was starting to say, oh, I like that place over there, or that city has like, a river, and I need a river, then they'd come with their knights and whatever, and they'd attack, and they'd wipe out your farm, and you'd have to run behind the walls of the city. So there was plague, there was starvation, there was like attacks, there was, and barbarians still coming through, Germanic tribes especially, were just like coming all through. So there was just all this chaos for like 400 years in Europe. And the one thing that started to give order to it was the Catholic Church. There's a great book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And it basically is about the monks, mainly in Irish monks, because they were more safe, because Britain was being raided by Vikings, right? So Ireland had a little buffer zone. So Ireland was a little safer. So a lot of the monasteries and the monks of monasteries were like doing these beautiful illuminated manuscripts and copying things. So a lot of the literature and philosophy plays that were kept alive were kept alive both in Constantinople, in Ireland, and of course there was the great library of Alexandria in Egypt, which was completely destroyed. What was in that library will never know. It was one of the biggest libraries in the world. Probably, all the other Greek writers we don't know about, The rest of Sophocles' plays were probably in that library, and it was burned. What?
Didn't we find some stuff?
Yeah.
Sometimes in it? The sea scroll or something?
No, that's
That's
further north. That's in the Sinai. Yeah, the Dead Sea is further north. Yeah, Alexandria is right on the northern African coast in Egypt. Yeah.
I'm just curious, I was an expected to know this from the Catholic school my whole life, but, so when Christianity started mixing with the Roman gods, like, how did that happen? Like, who introduced it? Or just like when it started, when the transition
Christianity?
began?
Christianity, it's very slow. It's over several hundred years.
And
It's really over several hundred years. And it really, what happened is that it took advantage of things completely falling apart. Basically, the Roman gods went because all the tribes that were coming in didn't believe in the Roman gods, right? So as Rome gets scattered, as it gets, there's not centers anymore. It's like people are scattered too. So the idea of what we call civilization, like it's interesting because when we talk about civilization tends to be in plains, it tends to be in communities, it tends to be, civilization, what we call civilization came around agriculture. Because we used to, way back, we were hunters and gatherers, we were nomadic, and that's a different thing. People you always look through history, people who live in the hills, and people who live in the plains, who are making towns, and the people who live in the hills. Well, you can look at ISIS, you can look at the Khmer Rouge, it's very similar in Cambodia. Khmer Rouge was living up in the hills, and then going crazy, eating bugs, and getting more and more fanatic, and then came down into Cambodia, and it was a bloodbath. And ISIS is a little similar. It's a whole, so if you imagine our fear of ISIS right now, put that 100 times with 100 different groups, and that's your Middle Ages. ISIS is very medieval. It's really, that is what's going on.
They just have people unskilled.
You could be decapitated working in your field and somebody comes by that's raiding your, God is like, oh my God, they just killed a whole village.
That they were gonna start beheading people in Times Square. I heard that, but I mean, it's
A lot of it is they want us. Also, a lot of it, there's a lot of theories about what it is and what it is in propaganda. What's really going on. I mean, they're definitely, the Kurds are trying to hold them off of the city on the border, and if that city falls, it's going to be bad news. But it's also we're supposed to go to war. It's all about trying to get us to go to war. But a lot of people say, well, is this like Hitler? Is this like what is this? What is really going on?
Definitely not like Hitler.
What do you mean, like Hitler?
That we should get involved.
Oh.
Because if America hadn't gotten involved in World War II, history would probably be very different.
Because Hitler was, the reason all that happened was because we punished them so harshly in
That's
World War I because
That's
the
absolutely
economy
right.
collapsed, and so
Cause
he
and
said,
effect,
"You want all the money?
cause
The
and
Jews have all
effect.
the money. Let's kill them."
The cycle, but this is what we're talking about in history, in terms of cycles, of people, this is a really big discussion. But it's also endemic to the Middle Ages because Rome brought it on itself. Rome brought the collapse on itself. Athens brought its collapse on itself in terms of that good old quality, which is going to show up in the 7 deadly sins, which is one of the 7 deadly sins, and what the Greeks talked a lot in the plays, which is greed, yes, definitely greed, but also hubris, pride, envy, all of it. Yeah, we're going to talk about the 7 deadly sins in a second, in terms of, and how interesting it is that in Sanskrit theater, pride is not necessarily a sin. Envy is an unstable emotion, But pride in what you do that's good and noble and whatever and creative, that's a stable emotion. It's not a sin. And it's interesting in terms of like how qualities are treated in human beings in terms of what quality. But we're going to get to the seven deadly sins because they're going to really factor into what's happened. Okay, so this is a really, really, really important event in terms of a lot of the history of what's happening now, right? So see, when it happens. So there becomes a couple of 100 years of Christianity and Islam fighting. This is old stuff. So the Viking attacks are destroying monasteries, especially in England and Great Britain. But here's something interesting. The Moors are in Spain, and they're translating the complete works of Aristotle. What's happening, too, is that in Constantinople, in Spain, there's a kind of respect for literature and for culture and intellectualism. What there isn't is, like, figurative art. Because in Islam, only God can make, create a human being, create an animal. So if you've ever been to, like, Spain, or especially in Granada, the Alhambra, which was the last place where the Moors really had sway in Spain. And they were kicked out in 1492, which is an interesting thing, because that's when Spain became unified. And all of Spain, sort of said, okay, now we're going to be a Christian country. And Spain at that point was like the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, too. A lot of the Spanish kings were Austrian-Hungarian. The history there gets really wacky in terms of like what goes on. But the whole kind of tradition, what happens is that you have this kind of geometric, kind of art rather than figurative art. Because the whole idea is that only God is allowed to imitate. So there's no theater either. There's not a tradition of that kind of imitative art of theater in terms of human beings imitating other human beings in different stories. So look how long this happens. 813 is when, theater, that's the final thing. Clergy is banned. So this takes place over several hundred years, and there's a lot of chaos that's happening. And around this time is when we move into the early Middle Ages, when we start to get some order. And now it's going to be all about trying to bring order into chaos. Everything starts to be codified. We start to talk about astronomy, We start to make this, organize the sins and the virtues. We have sort of rules of behavior, society. There's a real attempt to bring stability and order back into what's been several hundred years of chaos. So now we're in the early Middle Ages. Now, this is a really important date. This is actually, it's Hroswitha of Gandersheim. So she's, there's a little historical quibble of whether she actually was an abbess, a nun, or whether she was a lay person who was kind of at the head of this abbey in Germany, in Gandersheim. But what she does is that she reads the plays of Terence, right? Our playwright, our slave, who translates, Menander, and writes these very literate, complicated new comedies in Latin. So she reads Latin, and she finds these plays. And of course, the subject matter, is not something that she wants to put forward, but she thinks they're funny, and they're elegant, and they're great. This is a great teaching tool, she decides, for the people, for the nuns, for the congregation. It's a little unclear whether it was performed just for the nuns themselves or for the congregation as well in the area. But she writes about 9 or 10 little plays that have, the ones that we know have survived, that talk about Christian subject matter in kind of Roman plays. Like Dulcitius is a very famous one, which is kind of about, it takes place in this whole period of chaos when the Roman Empire is falling, but when Christians are still being martyred, right, because they're opposing the state. It's really dangerous to be a Christian for the early part of this. So, this happens in the first, like, before 200 ACE in the play. And there's a Roman, there's the local Roman officer, who heads up the area, and there are these three, young virgins who are like qualities, who take on the virtues, the qualities of the virtues. And they are locked up, and they said, no, you have to give up, Jesus and your Christianity, and they say, we won't. And there's like the lieutenant, like, falls in love with them, and then, he wants to sexually assault them, but an angel comes, and he's in the kitchen, and he thinks that the pots and pans are the virgins, so he's fondling the virgins and making a big racket, and they're looking through the door going, what's he doing? He said, I don't know, he's like, fondling the pots, I'm getting all covered with soot. So it becomes this little comedy, and then at the end, they're going to be executed, but then they disappear. They're supposed to be, the Roman soldiers are supposed to shoot arrows at them, and then they disappear. And it's a miracle, because they've been taken to heaven. And it's about the martyrdom of, that they're willing to be martyred for their faith, and they're not going to be, sullied by these Romans. So it's a little comedy play about Christian martyrdom and by faith, and holding true to the faith, and that God will save your soul, basically, if you hold true to the faith. So, and then there's like stories of Abraham and other Bible stories, but basically what she does is that she thinks, well, there's no books yet. Gutenberg hasn't invented the printing press. To have a book, somebody has to copy it. It's a huge illiterate population in the Europe that's starting to get more stable. That's starting to, especially around these monasteries, especially around the church. The church starts to own land. We still have a feudal system, but the church is also starting to act as the sort of overlord of peasants and land. So the church is starting to own land. So there's a kind of stability that's starting to form. So, but this is really way before. People don't really discover her until several years later. And actually her work isn't published and known to other people till 1501. So quite 500 years later. But what's interesting about her is she's doing something that's not going to really happen for almost a couple of hundred years in the rest of Europe. She's one of these things, and we're going to see these figures that are just quantum leaps forward, that sometimes are recognized and sometimes are not in their time.
I immediately find a comparison with Sor Juana Inés.
Yes, very much so. Yes, Juana Inés is very much the same type of thing. Yes.
Basically.
Yeah. Do you want to tell class about Juana?
She wasn't. I think she was around. I think she's a little bit.
She's later.
She's later.
Yeah, she's later.
In the Spanish Golden Age.
Yeah,
a little bit.
yeah.
She was a nun, but she decided to be a nun because she didn't want to get married. So that was the only reason she decided to be a nun. And she dedicated her life to reading and writing poems. And she actually wrote a poem that's really famous now. That's called. It's like. Stupid men that accuse the woman unrightfully. That accuse her without reason. Right. And it's considered one of the most feminist poems ever written, and it was written in this time. Yep. So she was a woman that was completely ahead of her time. She had scientific theories, and they were actually going to throw her out of the monastery. However, she had to give up writing for a while. Because she didn't want to get married. That was her biggest fear. She didn't want to become a poet. Yeah. So that's. Yeah. She was completely ahead of her time.
What's her name?
Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. So it's.
Wait, De la Cruz?
De la Cruz, yeah.
So
I'll write it down.
Yeah. There's also Hildegard of Bingen, you know, who starts to, you know, there's these very.
It's very, I didn't know that somebody like her existed in another.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's incredible.
They kind of pop up,
Yeah.
and it's really interesting in terms of like.
The fact that they're women too.
Yeah. Yeah. So what happens here now around in the 10th century is we start to see drama come out of the liturgy, so out of the Mass. So what's happening in the Mass is that suppose the first thing is the Quem Queritus, which is whom do you see? It's the three Marys come to the tomb, right? And the body of Jesus is gone, and there's an angel there who says, whom do you see when Queritus? And they, you know, say, we see that the angel says, no, he is, you know, he is risen, he's not here, he is risen.
That was
So, what?
That was a play?
That was a little play, it was called a trope. A trope was an interpolation into the Catholic Mass, so they kind of performed it. It was just like, you know, 6 lines maybe, but it was like a little scene that was done in the Mass. And then they found out people really liked that. People sort of perked up. And then, you know, the priest would go on the sermon and the sort of Mass, but then suddenly this little play in the center of the Mass, you know, at Easter, sort of got people like interested and said, well, this is really interesting. Maybe we'll do a little Christmas magic. Maybe we will act out, you know, the three kings and the manger and whatever. So they started to do Christmas. Yeah, what was your question?
I was just wondering what it was called, like the name for the.
The Three Marys was the little play. There was a lot of Three Mary plays. So the Three Mary play. Huh?
His mom and
Mary Magdalene, yeah, Mary Magdalene and Mary's sister, his sister Mary. So it's the Three Marys. It's the Three Marys, and this becomes,
Who's number one in the movie?
so.
The first like half the alphabet hadn't been invented yet.
Yeah. Well, you got Mary, you got
So
Mary.
these, I put these on the blackboard so you can see them.
Mary.
But this is a really interesting thing. It's sort of like little images of what was happening. So what's going on is sort of, as we go into start going into what's known as the High Middle Ages, is that you have animal acts, entertainment. This is something that was in Rome too. Trained horses and dogs and animal acts, right? Are sort of what people are sort of looking at the town square. You also have this thing called mummers. Mummers are still in England. It's a tradition. If you remember,
you showed us the
picture with the newspaper, which
yeah.
is just like the tribe with the leaves.
Yeah.
It's almost the same image, which is so interesting. So mummers generally go from house to house performing, you know, at the Yuletide, at Christmas time. And they're fed by the people that they go visit. So they kind of sing, it's like caroling, you know, that's kind of a continuation of the mummers. Then there's, you know, juggling and all these kind of things and magic tricks, like, you know, and things that happen in the streets, you know, kind of entertainment that happens in the street. Little games of chance. The sort of medieval version of three-card Monte, which was like a little ball, you know, under cups, things like that. So there's magic tricks. You know, this is going to be like in the streets, in the town squares, on bridges. There's going to be this real kind of street life. It's not theater, but it's kind of performance that people watch, they're entertained by it. So this whole idea of people watching performance. So again, there are people dressing up as animals. It kind of goes back to the ritual roots of theater to begin with. There's jousts, you know, jousts and those types of things. That's kind of, the violence is not, it's not like people can get killed at jousts, but it's kind of a continuation of what was happening in the Roman Colosseum. It's battles, but it's not quite as bloody. There has a, you know, an elegance to it, and also the age of chivalry is going to start to come in. Women, you know, women being put on a pedestal. You know, a knight that's going to, like, you know, joust for a lady, generally a married lady, not anyone one he's going to have an affair with, but he's going to wear her colors. So it's the whole idea of chivalry and the virtuous woman, because you're supposed to be like the Virgin Mary. And the virtuous woman and the non-virtuous woman, and what does it mean to be a woman who knows her place? This is going to factor in even into Elizabethan England in terms of the Shakespeare characteristics, in terms of what, again, just like what is the role of women in Greek society, we're going to see, what the role of women are going to be in medieval going into Elizabethan society. There's processions, like, when battles are won. The Arc de Triomphe in Paris, was built for a parade to go through, a victory parade to go through. The Washington Square Arch, I don't remember the exact history of it. It was built for some kind of, celebration of, do you remember?
I didn't know that.
Yeah, but that's the kind of arch that, was built for a big parade to go through, for procession, for inaugurations, for crowning, coronations of that point of kings, or victories or such.
And
So
some
there
had
we-
narratives of the victory.
The what?
Most of them had told the story.
Told a story,
Sure.
exactly, of the victory, of the, right. So there are these kind of street secular performances that are starting to happen. So there's a kind of life in but they're not really, they're not really considered plays like texts and stories inside of an enclosed space. So what starts to happen is that the Quem Quertus, this is Roswitha here, what they think this is like a little illustration of one of her plays, Abraham and Maria. And then this is the Quem Quertus, the angels. Whom seek you in the tomb, O Christians? Quem Quertus, whom do you seek? And the three Marys, Jesus of Nazareth, crucified, O heavenly beings. The angels say, He is not here. He is risen as He foretold. Go forward and announce that He is risen from the tomb. And then the three Marys would walk through, the central aisle probably of the church and get the whole congregation, really glorifying the fact. Now this is goes all the way back to the Dionysian ritual in terms of what that was, the sporagmos, and then the the discovery of the parts, and then the announcing of the resurrection and the apotheosis. Like we talked about apotheosis, right? The God enters you. Have you seen the movie The Highlander? The quickening, right? When you get all this energy, that's what it is. Entheos, osmos, enthusiasm, apotheosis, you are possessed by the God. You raise up. It's like the quickening. It's like, ooh, you get so the whole idea of the celebration, being filled with the spirit of the God, it's Christianity, but it also harkens all the way back to a lot of ritual and the Dionysian ritual. So what happens is that more and more of these plays start to be done. So the first complete plays that are done are called the Passion plays. And they really are the whole story of Easter, the Passion, doing the Last Supper, performing the Last Supper all the way through the crucifixion, all the way through the resurrection. So a Passion play literally becomes a little play that completely tells the story and generally they start when Jesus enters Jerusalem, a lot of them start, right? So what happens is that sometimes these plays are done on little platforms that are called mansions. And they're this is you start seeing these kind of Gothic cathedrals and churches are starting to be built. So in these little arches, there'll be tiny little stages. And there'll be a different scene that played on each day. Like here, will be stations.
Of the Cross.
Sometimes Stations of the Cross.
We did that every Friday.
Yes, Stations of the Cross. Can be the Stations of the Cross. So they're called mansions. And these mansions eventually are going to move out of the church into the church courtyard or into the town square and be done on big platforms either next to the church, because the church starts to get a little uneasy because people are going, oh, we're coming to see the plays. And it's okay, it's starting to get away, it's starting to be a separate thing, but we'll do it outside in the courtyard. And then they start going, I don't know that we want to produce these anymore, but the towns, as the towns start getting more and more tradesmen, the towns actually get bigger, more stable. People start moving, finding other centers of their community other than the church. Trade guilds are going to take responsibility for these. They're going to expand to do what they call the mystery plays, which is any play that comes from the Bible. And they're going to be called the cycle plays. So the cycle plays, I don't know if anybody went just recently at the Flea Theater. They did a thing called the mystery plays, which was like 34 little plays that were written by 34 writers, with like 40 actors, that were kind of done in the Flea Theater all around you and performed. And it goes all the way back to the creation, and Adam and Eve, and Noah, and it basically does the Bible story. So these are, first they're done, they start to be done by the church, and then slowly,
So would these be performed all simultaneously, or the audience would travel from one to the
the
next?
audience originally would travel from one to the other. So, in one thing, if you started to do the full mystery passion plays, the cycle, these are the English cycle plays, and they became very popular in England. They're also done in Germany, and they're also going to be done in Spain. They're the entremeses in Spain. These religious plays are going to be all over Europe. Basically, what the Holy Roman, now it's the Holy Roman Empire, right? It's the Roman Empire, but it's the Holy Roman Empire. So you have Alexander the Great, Rome takes over, expands that, and then basically Christianity takes that and expands further.
Is this before or after, like, the theater was banned for the first time?
Oh, this is after.
After?
This is after. Yeah, no. Theater's banned, like, at the end, like, in the 10th century.
Okay.
And then, and then you have Roswitha, who's at the same time as the last, like, clerics are not allowed to go to theater. She's starting to perform these plays in her monastery. It's not until, like, 100, 150 years later that the churches start to do this, like, Quem Queritus, these performances.
So
If you look at the timeline, you'll see if you have time to look at the timeline, you'll see how it's laid out. But that's a really important question in terms of, like, because this is a whole thing with dates. It's like, okay, what the exact date is, but I think it's important to know what is built on what hands off to what. Roman Empire falls apart, Christianity rises, theater gets banned, right? Also, who has time for theater when you're, trying to,
Land off those 100.
run for your life, eat, not die from the plague, Theater is sort of like, who has time for theater, right? It's not exactly first on your mind.
So are all the plays like banned if there's about anything else?
Like anything else as in...
Besides like the passion plays or the cycle plays?
No, those aren't banned. The Greek,
Euripides,
all...
Seneca.
We don't... Passion cycle plays, look, okay. This is when they start here. Now, this is a really good question because, okay. So, this is when they're starting. See, this again, this takes place over several hundred years. See? We're going into...
So that's over
up to
150 years after they've been,
Yeah.
which is up there in 813.
Yeah. See, this is the last one, but this is the last little thing. Meanwhile, all this other stuff is falling apart. Meanwhile, St. Augustine is talking about anti-theater there, and even before him, this Roman philosopher, Christian philosopher, is starting to write against the theater all the way back there. So it's a long cycle. It's a long cycle what happens. So the Greek, Roman plays, the pagan plays are banned. Because that's what theater is. And then...
The Christians hate the pagans. We all know that.
What?
The Christians hate the pagans.
Christians hate the pagans.
That's why they took over Christmas from them.
Hate the pagans.
Because Jesus
We're talking about religion, but
Do
we're
I?
also talking about political and economic power, right? They go hand in hand. I mean, if you talk about capitalism, capitalism went hand in hand with Calvinism, where Calvinism said, if God loved you, you did well financially. That was the proof that God loved you. So if you were rich, that meant God loved you. And we have this attitude, we have the attitude that we see. It's like, well, I did well, so, I deserve everything I got. And if you're like, homeless and starving, that must mean that you're, bad.
You could pay your entrance into heaven.
What?
Calvinism.
You could pay for your entrance into heaven, that's right.
What are those things called?
Yeah, they were.
What are they called? They're called,
I don't know.
oh,
They
God.
would literally sell tickets.
Yeah.
Yes, they would sell tickets to heaven, and it was paid to the church.
Yeah.
The church was rich. The church became really rich. The church supplanted a lot of the secular nobility. So what we're looking at as we move into this thing is the fight for control between church and state. This is one reason in this country we said it's going to be a separation of church and state, because the state did not want the church to get control again. Said the church is about religion, stay out of politics, stay out of economics, But the church is politics. The church is economics.
Everything is politics.
Everything is politics and everything is economics.
Everything is sex.
I think we'd actually be better off if everything was sex. Weirdly,
No, there's that scene in The Office with like James Spader,
Yeah.
where he's talking to John Krasinski, and he's like, "Everything is sex, Jim." And he's just like after because Jim's interviewing him, and then afterwards he's just like, "I think he's a genius, but he's terrifying."
It's interesting because there's a German philosopher. This is like in the 40s. There was this the Frankfurt School of Philosophy in Germany, and there are like several: Walter Benjamin, Herbert Marcuse, Eric Fromm. There's like a lot of philosophers that came out of that, and there's this book called Eros and Civilization that basically looks at repressive societies. And the whole thing is that the repression is about eros, which is not so much sex, but sexuality, life force. It's the life force, It's like how you want to, you want to reproduce, but that becomes creativity, that becomes life. Sex is just one expression of eros. It is the life force. And every repressive regime will try to find ways to, repress the life force. And you see that over and over in history. And in a way, this is kind of what's happening here, too. So, over this long period of time, we're talking, again, 400 years, we see the development of the tropes, the passion plays. Let's look at the English cycle plays again. See? Now, what happens here when the English cycle play, this is when the guilds, the trade unions, they're kind of like trade unions, take over responsibility for doing it. The church says this is becoming too much entertainment. It's getting away from, we're losing control of it. We don't want anything to do with it. We're not going to be the producers of theater anymore. So they start to pull away from theater. But then the trade guilds start to take over. So you have things you see here, like you have, the coming of the kings, adoration. The goldsmiths are going to take that. That makes sense, right? Because the kings are bringing, gold and frankincense and myrrh in these beautiful, objects. So the goldsmiths are going to say, I'm going to make these beautiful objects. Like the flight into Egypt is going to be, like the shipwrights here, the building of the ark. The shipwrights are going to build the ark,
I think
right?
my favorite is the baptism of Jesus is the barbers.
It's the barbers, right?
It's like a haircut. You're just washing your hair. Like,
Yeah. And they have the big, sort of things that. So it's really, some of them you kind of go, really? I wonder what that was about. But some of them, really make sense.
The burial.
The birth of Jesus. The trial.
Oh no.
The resurrection is the carpenters.
Yeah. So what did they probably
They
built
built,
something
yeah.
that the actor could, could sort of ascend,
The
right?
the mortification of Christ and burials, the butchers. What?
Yeah, that's kind of scary, right?
I guess they just brought in some raw meat and dressed it up like.
Right.
Oh,
The cooks, the second accusation before Pilate, remorse of Judas, purchase of the field of blood. The cooks and the water leaders. Interesting, huh? Like the shearmen, Christ led to cavalry.
creation by the class.
Was he surrounded by sheep? Maybe, maybe, I don't know.
So these plays are based off the Bible.
These plays are all based off the
The Last Supper
Bible.
was
But
sponsored
do
by
they
the
use
bakers.
biblical characters, or are they taking it straight from the Bible, or are they interpreting into their own?
No, they're doing straight from the Bible.
Okay.
They're not doing adaptations, but they are hosting it. And
Uh-huh.
kind of they're advertising. A lot of them are kind of advertising their wares.
Sled.
Like the flight into Egypt has something
Last
to
meal
do with people
sponsored
who are
by
working with horses.
Mary's Bakery.
If you liked what you saw here,
The sacrifice of Cain and Abel, the
You want to
glubbers.
eat what Jesus
That's what Shakespeare's father was. You kind of go, wow, like, did they like kill, something?
so was Danny's father.
Yeah.
How are they advertising?
They're advertising because if I'm going to see a play and you're a goldsmith and I see the beautiful gold thing that you've made for the kings to bring in, right? Or I see your gorgeous horses on the flight to Egypt, or the fact that you can really build in a good ark. It's product placement.
Abraham and Isaac, parchmenters and book what?
I don't know.
That doesn't make any sense.
I don't know. Like some of
I'm gonna sacrifice you like a sheep. Sponsored by the bookmakers. Like,
was it a cantastoria? Did they do pages of a book? Rather than have someone who sacrificed, did they draw on pages? There's not a lot of information about how they were done. It's just, they have the titles and they put together who the guilds were. So the York cycle, the Wakefield cycle, and this is basically what the play at the Flea did, and just sort of had people rewrite these stories. And in that case, they adapted them and they rewrote them. But they were still pretty much the Bible stories. So what's happening is that we move from the tropes in the service to the kind of mystery plays and the passion plays and the cycle plays. And then it's going to move to lives of saints. And there's a saint, 365 saint. There's a writer named Eric N., who is writing a play, a saint play for every day of the year. And some of them are done. This is like, these are, I think, about 9 of them here. But he wants to write a saint play for each, because there's a saint for every day. So he wants to write 365 plays. So these were the miracle
way
plays.
too many saints, dog.
Because miracles, the whole idea is that one way you're a saint is that it's proven that you can do some kind of miracle. So these are going to be called the miracle plays. Again, they're going to start in the church, in the mansions. They're going to move next door. And then they don't so much go on the pageant wagons. The pageant wagons, well, this is the other thing. What happens is, so let's say you have this, right? You have all of these things. So they're done in a couple of ways. They're done in a couple of different ways. Okay. So first, here's inside the church. Then we have outside the church. Like this is a big kind of platform, right? That's next to the church, where you have all the mansions that are set up on the platform. This is an illustration which shows. I have a better picture of this, which I'll send around. This is kind of like the first director. You see this guy here who's kind of directing this scene. This is the martyrdom of Saint Apollonia, and she's one of the saints. So this is a miracle play that's being performed outside. Here again, you see the platform that's going to be next to the church. Now, eventually, these platforms are going to be in the middle of the town square, and then at some point, they become pageant wagons. We're going to see this in Spain as well. And sometimes they're very, very elaborate wagons. So instead of the mansions, each scene is on a wagon. So the people, because now it's become really popular. Now it's like it's like if you imagine Mardi Gras, the floats. These are the first floats. These are floats. And on each float, they come to the corner, and the audience is standing at the corner, and they play, their little 5-minute scene. Then they go to the next corner, and the next wagon comes up, and you're standing on the corner, and you see the next scene. So these pageant wagons are procession, and they go through the town, basically. So this becomes, and some of them become hugely elaborate. And again, there's competition in who gets the most beautiful, pageant wagon and scenes. Like they become like double-tiered.
Or the cart maker.
This becomes a very famous scene, the harrowing of hell. Sort of like how.
The cart maker in the forest. We got this, guys. We got this.
The harrowing of hell and those types of scenes become really, really popular. Here's, I'll send a couple of these around. Let me see if I have better ones.
Yeah.
And there's like a mouth of hell.
I want to find the one with the director. Oh, these are the mummers. It's a better picture of the mummers. Here's, you can see some illustrations of what the pageant wagons. Oh, here's the Saint Apollina. And you can kind of see the director, the first director, writer, who's kind of sort of with his baton there, sort of directing the scene. This is one of the harrowing of hell. The harrowing of hell became really, really popular. So what we're starting to see is we're starting to see religious subjects, but they're starting to be more about the secular entertainment, about building the community, about product placement of the guilds, or sort of taking responsibility of the guilds. And again, this becomes sort of like, it's a pride, just the way in Athens, if you were a dignitary in Athens, you got status by having your son be in the chorus. Here, there was a kind of status to you producing and presenting, and creating one of these little tiny plays. So theater started to get a kind of status. And then what starts to happen is that we start to get secular plays. And we start to get secular plays that are really tied into folk tales. So here quickly, in the high Middle Ages, we're also seeing a lot of churches, big churches being built. Towns, cities become more stable. Churches are being built. Churches are centers of education. Universities start to happen around churches. Also, universities are starting to be built. So education of the masses through the church, but also outside the church and secular thing. Here, the Feast of Corpus Christi, they're trying to really the church is sort of saying, okay, we're going to sort of, try to get a little bit of control over all these plays that are being done before we decide we're not going to deal with it at all.
Is that is Robin and Mary? Is that Robin Locksley and?
That's right.
Okay.
That's Robin Hood. This is where folk tales start to happen. So secular drama starts to happen, which is about folk heroes.
Have you seen the TV series that was on BBC?
No. Is
So
it good?
It's amazing. Yeah.
So what's interesting about this is that this becomes the first anti-hero, right? So secular plays that are going to be about, that start to be maybe criticizing the church or criticizing the nobility or celebrating the nobility. Secular plays are starting to emerge. But look at where we are, right? We're in the 13th century now.
Well, I think.
Meanwhile, there's still invasions. Genghis Khan, that's a name maybe you know. Genghis Khan is invading. This is like St. Francis of Assisi, who's then going to get a lot of plays written about him. Look at this, Oxford University, 1157, still there. Notre Dame of Paris.
Yeah,
Also in the meantime, The Crusades are happening, right? There's going to be like 11 of them. Because as things start to get more peaceful, you have all these soldiers and all these knights, and if they're not fighting each other anymore, what are they going to do? How are you going to, feed the army? What's their mission? Oh, they're going to go to the Holy Land and regain the Holy Land, right?
What is Corpus Christi?
Corpus Christi is the feast of course, the body of Christ. And it actually, yeah. And it's a feast. It became a very famous theater festival that became a whole festival of plays. And it's also the ritual. Yeah, eating the communion. And actually, it started in, is it Orvieto in Italy?
in Corpus Christi in Texas.
That's funny. I think it's in Orvieto that they said that the communion host bled. Actually bled. And, a lot of people think it was a priest's trick or whatever. It wasn't a miracle. But like a sleight of hand. But the whole water into wine was a magic trick that was done, So it became a whole sort of thing. But I think it was Orvieto in Italy that first had it, and it put it on the map. So the Feast of Corpus and the big festival would be there because they had the host, the bloody napkin that supposedly the host, the body of Christ had bled into. So that really put it on the map. We're talking about economics now, economics, religion. It starts to all kind of merge. Politics, economics, religion. So meanwhile, there's still a certain amount of chaos. So in the late Middle Ages, this is where we see the guilds start to, and here we start seeing some really amazing literature start to happen. Dante writes the Divine Comedy in 1314 to 1321. Here's the war between England and France. This is going to be a whole thing which we're going to see in which one? Well, this is Henry, Henry V, was going to be part of this sort of England after the Norman invasion, the Normans, the descendants of the Normans who came from France, so say, well, we actually have rights to France. This is going to be the whole big thing of the plot of Henry V. Why he says, we're going to have the Battle of Agincourt because I should be the King of France. All this kind of stuff is going to give real fodder to Shakespeare's plays. Remember, Shakespeare's plays are kind of nationalistic thing, his history plays. They're saying to the Tudors, to England that's recently become the major power in Europe because the Spanish Armada has been defeated. This is how glorious you are. The theater starts to be tied into romanticism, into nationalism, into sort of separate identities. People are starting to form slowly what we're now going to know as Europe is the seeds of different countries. The fact that the French and the Germans are different, that the British and the French are different, that the Polish and the Germans are different. We're going to start seeing national identities form. And the theater is going to be very part of that. The theater is one way that a national identity, a community identity, the same way at the beginning, you share an identity with each other. You share stories with each other. You share heroes or heroines with each other. And the qualities of value, the ideas of what bonds your value system together. So once it starts moving away from the church, which became this very big unifying thing, moving into more secular identities, we have the thing, and then the church and the state are going to fight. And the church and the state are going to fight. Here we have in France, French, farces are starting, little comedies. Here, this is a big, big thing, 1453. That's when the Turks take Constantinople. It becomes Istanbul. All these people flee, and a lot of people say this is kind of the beginning of the Renaissance, because there's a huge influx of all these, of things in Greek, which have not really been seen in Europe until then. Aristotle, the Greek plays, Greek ideas of sculpture, architecture.
It's been 500 years since they banned.
Yes. So this is 500 years. This is a slow process. The church has been at the center of it. The church that originally said theater's immoral, whatever, then says, no, theater is a great learning tool. Brooks Sweet is going to know this almost 100 years before it really starts taking off in other churches. But slowly, and the theater evolves from inside the church to next to the church to starting to be taken over by the guilds on platforms in town squares, on the pageant wagons, moving from the passion plays about, Bible stories, mystery plays about mystery or passion plays. There's kind of an interchangeability in that description, to the miracle plays, which are done basically on different days, saint days. They're done on the day of the saint, most likely, that the saint is being honored, to secular plays, stories of like Robin Hood, kind of hero journeys, much more folk little comedies, domestic comedies, the type of thing that Terence is writing, except domestic. Fathers and sons, some of the stock plots are going to come in. The type of things that's been roaming around with commedia is going to start to come in. Farces are going to start to come in. So we have secular theater start to happen. The great houses all over Europe, and especially in England, are going to have what are going to be called intervals. They're going to be like the touring, like the mummers, who kind of went from house to house. There's going to be little touring companies of actors who are going to come to a great manor house, and you're going to have dinner, and it's like maybe you have a little play, an act of a play in between each course. If you know the play Pericles by Shakespeare, it was most likely done at someone's manor house, which is why it's such an odd little play. Each little act of it was probably done in between a course. So it's like these little it's almost like 5 little different plays. Yeah?
So it was kind of like a dinner theater?
It was like dinner theater, and they were called interludes. So in Hamlet, that's what the players arrive to do. They are performing an interlude. That's what's... So these actors are kind of vagabonds, and then slowly they're going to be sponsored by the great lords and man, and like if you're the Earl of Essex, if you're, you sponsor a theater company. If you're the Queen, you sponsor
the
a theater
Earl of
company.
Essex, isn't that is that the one who's believed that wrote the Shakespeare plays or whatever?
That's the Earl of Oxford. Edward, we'll talk about that. Edward de Vere.
I don't believe.
I don't either. Mark Rylance does.
Really?
It's a really good fight with Mark Rylance, yeah. Anyway.
Is this also in like patrons?
The what?
Patrons?
Patrons. That's right.
Like Mark Rylance.
Yes. And in fact, you had to have a patron. By the time you start getting towards Shakespeare's time in England, there was a vagabond act. So if you were a roaming, it's like tinkers. You were considered thieves, and prostitutes and whether gypsies, tramps, and thieves, like the Cher song. That's kind of the way you were considered. But if you were sponsored by the Earl of Leicester, who was the sponsor for the company Shakespeare is going to join, he becomes he's the Lord Chamberlain. He becomes the Lord Chamberlain. So it's the Lord Chamberlain's men with Burbage, who builds one of the first theaters
Rose.
called Theater. We're going to get to this next class.
That's the Rose, right?
No, the Rose is the other one. The Rose is the rival company, Philip Henslow's theater.
Oh, that's right.
The Rose
That's
is, if you've seen
Oh,
Shakespeare in Love,
Yeah.
there's rival companies now, right? And it's a kind of competition. And we're kind of back to Athens, where you have the competition with the 3 plays. Now you have theater companies that are kind of stealing, Shakespeare writing for the Rose. Is he writing for the theater? Who's Marlowe writing for? Is it going to be, who's the lead actor? Is it going to be Ned Elaine or is it going to be Burbage? But theater starts to be, it's sponsored. It's sponsored by the nobility, who the companies, like if there's a plague in London or if it's off-season in London, they're going and they're touring to these houses and they're doing these interludes. So this is kind of the whole sweep. So we see medieval, and then here you see all the events that start to be written about, right? By Shakespeare. This is one of the morality plays. So the next one is the morality play. And the morality play, how are we for time? What time are we at?
We're about to.
143.
Yeah,
Okay.
so break time.
Okay.
Technically.
Quickly, wrapping up. We're going to talk about the virtues and the sins.
That sounds good to me, man.
Right? Right. Virtues and sins.
I don't need that break yet.
So it's interesting if you look at, like, there's a whole several different lists of virtues. I always used to, you know the song from Camelot, Mordred's song from Camelot? The 7 deadly virtues, those ghastly little traps. Oh no, my liege, they were not meant for me. The 7 deadly virtues were made for other chaps who love a life of failure and ennui. Take courage. Now there's a sport. An invitation to the state of rigor and purity, a noble yen, and very restful every now and then. I find humility means to be hurt. It's not the earth the meek inherit, it's the dirt. Honesty is fatal, it should be taboo. Diligence a fate I would hate. If charity means giving, I give it to you. And fidelity is only for your mate. Ha! So that's Mordred, King Arthur's evil little nephew, right? Who says the 7 deadly virtues. So
The seven deadly sins by the
so
Traveling
the 7
Rotary.
deadly sins.
No?
What are the 7 deadly sins? There's a movie called Seven, which outlines that. Right. So, lust. Yes, lust.
Gluttony.
Greed.
Sloth.
Sloth, gluttony.
Adultery.
Adultery kind of comes into lust. You want something someone else has. Envy.
Wife on the mind.
And what Seneca was trying to tell Nero maybe not to indulge in?
Wrath of Khan.
Now, what's really interesting is that these first came out in like the 5th century by a Greek monk in northern Africa, who actually there were 8 sins. Gregory the Great is going to codify them into 7 sins in the 6th century. Interestingly enough, he's going to add envy. Envy isn't on the original list. There's another one that's going to go into sloth, which is kind of, it's apathy. It's I don't care. Apathy. It's like, apathy is going to be sloth. Sloth is not so much that you lie around the house not doing anything. Sloth is like a spiritual sloth. So apathy kind of becomes, but it's interesting that apathy is a sin. It becomes spiritual sloth. And then there's vainglory, which kind of goes into pride. But the 8th sin is really interesting. And people get really upset when they hear what it is. Do you want to know what it is? The 8th sin, anyone know? It's sadness. It's despair. It's hopelessness. That's the 8th, that was the 8th sin. Pope Gregory got it because, why? Yes.
It kind of relates to just that inaction, or just that.
It's inaction, but also, yeah? Yeah, if you're looking at it as from the Sanskrit way, yes, sadness would also be an unstable. That's really good. In Sanskrit, in the rasa, sadness would be unstable because it's temporary, right? Though, Though loss, mourning for loss is a sense of, ability to mourn is a stable one. But the whole thing with, if you believe in God, if you are connected to God, why do you feel despair? Why do you feel sadness if God is in the world? This was like, it connects to me, and then we're going to go on a break. Connects to me in a very personal way because I really like a lot of Bible. I was really into Bible stories for some reason. When I was a kid, I thought, maybe I'll be a priest. And then I was like, no, you can't be a priest. You're a woman. Oh. Then I got over it. I became into the theater. Perfectly logical, right? It's like, the competition. It's like, how do you, help people, talk about things and connect to things, when they're sitting in a group together and watching something. Okay, you can't be in the church. You'll be in the theater. So I went to the theater. But I hated the prodigal son story. Because I always felt for the brother. And this went on for years. I can't tell you how old I was till finally I got it. And I realized, I went, oh, I get it. The brother's not a good brother. Because if he was a good brother, if he was connected to his connection to God, right? First of all, he'd be happy for his prodigal son brother, if you all know the story, it's come and like he kills the fatted calf, and the brother goes, I can't even get a goat for my friends, right? Get your goat. I don't even get a goat for my friends, but...
I ain't get no respect. I can't
get any respect!
For my friends. I need
No.
to go for my friends.
If he was really good, if he was really connected good to God, what would he need a goat for? He wouldn't need a goat. And he would be happy for his brother. So he's not such a good brother. He's kind of a phony, he's behaving well, but he's not really connected. It took me years to understand that story, which is a really profound story. Very quickly, and then we're going to take a break. So there were all kinds of punishments that you had in hell for like the 7 deadly sins, and there was animals that were connected to it, and some of the animals are really weird, and some of the colors are really weird.
Do you know which one is for apathy?
Oh, I
Sorry,
don't think they did. I think that was
that was a
gone.
joke.
Yeah, probably gray. I would say gray. However, what's really interesting is what do you think the animal connected with greed was?
Squirrel.
The pig. Squirrel's interesting, because it has a squirrel, but it was the pig. What do you think the color connected with envy was? Green. What do you think the color connected with anger was? Red. Yeah. So it's
lust?
Blood of angry men.
lust. Oh, lust was like blue, and it was like the cow. Like a cow.
Yeah, it was a cow.
It was a cow. Oh, you know this? Oh my God.
I did a production in an original production in high school. That
Oh my God.
We had 7 girls in our ensemble, so we did a production based
The 7 deadly sins were women. The tempters, Eve, the sins. We're going to see this in Christopher
and I
Marlowe.
wanted to be lust, but they made me greed.
They made you greed.
No, sloth.
Sloth.
No, gluttony.
Gluttony.
Were you
I was
all?
fat and I was eating
Yeah.
chocolate.
Yeah. Gluttony is a pig, and I forget pride. Pride is violet, is purple, and the animal's a horse, which is interesting because it's like, get off your high horse. You fall off your high horse. So it's really interesting how some of these things sort of translate. Okay, so let's take a break, and then we'll go to the Renaissance and talk about Christopher Marlowe and Dr. Faustus.
Morgan, are you